I'm Julie Stelton for Forum Daily Week in Review.
Well, it seems that Canadians had some very strong opinions around the prison transfer of an infamous serial killer. The Canadian press has obtained hundreds of messages that Canadians sent to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his cabinet ministers. This comes after the serial killer Paul Bernardo was transferred to a medium security prison. Mr. Bernardo is serving a life sentence for the kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder of two Ontario schoolgirls in the 1990s and the manslaughter death of his then-wife's 15-year-old sister. People wrote imploring the government to intervene, saying how vividly they remember the violent details of Mr. Bernardo's case. Well, joining us now is Mr. Tony Baldinelli, Member of Parliament for Niagara Falls and the MP who introduced a bill that would have changed the rules on prison transfers. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me and providing this opportunity.
And for some further background into this case, what was the justification of this prison transfer from correctional services, and what do you make of this justification as well?
Well, the justification and the use of it by Correctional Services Canada, ultimately in the end, I mean, the people to blame for this decision is this Liberal government. In 2019, they changed the law and they moved prison transfer and prison selection. The wording that used to be in place used to have the wording necessary restrictions. And in its place, they put the wording least restrictive environment. And so from that standpoint, the decision was made by Correctional Services of Canada staff to then transfer Bernardo.
And can you tell us a little bit more about this bill that you proposed that would prevent prison transfers of mass murderers and the reasons why you propose it, sir?
Well, it's based on the decision of Paul Bernardo himself and that decision by Correctional Services of Canada. My office was inundated, as I imagine all members of Parliament offices were, and I actually spoke to some of the friends of the victims who had asked that we take action, that we speak out against the decision, that we see that something like this never happens again. So I was able to work with my shadow critics for justice and public safety, as well as our leader, Pierre Poilievre, to put together my legislation, C-342, that would, in essence, change the legislation back and put the wording back to necessary restrictions and remove that least restrictive environment wording, which allowed that decision to be made.
And what has been the response in Ottawa to your bill, sir? I know reports indicate that this bill was discussed internally by the government, but where do we stand now?
Well, right now I've introduced it, and so what I have to wait, because it's a private member's bill, is to bring it forward for second reading. And so during this 44th Parliament, I'm kind of at a lower on the list. So I have to work with some of my colleagues to see if we can bring it forward earlier. But that doesn't preclude me from continuing to raise the issue, say, as a unanimous consent motion, for example, and we're going to continue to raise this issue, be it not only in the House, but at committee as well.
All right, sir. Now, another thing to consider would be how a bill like this may impact the programs and services, including psychological evaluations and rehabilitation efforts under Canada's correctional services. And what is your overall stance on these rehabilitation efforts as well?
Well, my legislation speaks to the fact that those who commit multiple murders or are classified as dangerous offenders get a maximum security classification and must serve their sentence in a maximum security institution. That does not preclude any of the programming that would be provided by correctional services. This is dealing with prison selection.
All right, sir, just about a minute left here, but what are some next steps for you as you await this debate of your bill at the second reading this fall?
Well, we're going to be coming back September 18th. My hope is to work with my colleagues on the Conservative side and see if we can move this legislation up forward to an earlier time to introduce second reading, and also work with my colleagues on committee to see if we can raise this issue with regards to Paul Bernardo, prison transfers, the actions of correctional services at either Justice Committee or Public Safety.
All right, something we'll be keeping our eyes on. Mr. Baldinelli, thank you again for your time today.
Thank you.
Up next, our interview with Tony Baldinelli, a member of Parliament for Niagara Falls. where we unpacked the recent prisoner transfer of Paul Bernardo, one of Canada's most notorious serial killers, and discuss a private member's bill that hopes to stop future transfers like this from happening. Stay tuned. Forum Daily Week in Review. We'll be back shortly.
Canada's corporate ethics watchdog is investigating whether Walmart, Hugo Boss, and Diesel have forced labor in their supply chains. Sherry Meyerhofer, the ombudsperson for responsible enterprise, issued 3 reports last week, which say none of those companies have done enough to demonstrate that the products they sell in Canada are free of slave labor. The Canadian subsidiaries of all 3 companies are accused of relying on suppliers who source materials from Uyghur people forced to work in China's Xinjiang region. Walmart, Hugo Boss, and Diesel all say that they uphold strong anti-slavery protocols and investigate the source of their products. Well, joining us now to discuss the issue of forced labor in China is Mr. Kayam Masimov, project manager at the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project. Mr. Masimov, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, back in 2021, Forum Daily did a special report on the Uyghur genocide in China, and you were part of that report, sir. We highlighted cotton and tomato products in particular as being connected to forced labor in China. So can you tell our viewers a little bit more about this and the conditions that Uyghur people are subject to in these forced labor camps that are present in Xinjiang?
Thank you for having me. I'd like to start with correcting and making a significant but small but very significant correction here. Xinjiang in Chinese means new domain, new frontier, and it's a colonialist name which is largely rejected by Uyghur people. So we refer to our homeland as East Turkestan. You can still refer to this as a Uyghur region because officially in Chinese constitution, it's labeled as Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. Coming back to the survivors, I have interviewed many. And when I interview them, they recall being subjected to 17, 18 hours long forced labor, sleeping on the cement floor, and eating food, which I would like to quote here, you would not feed to your animals. And detainees all recount the stories of physical, verbal, psychological, and sexual abuse. So one more phenomenon in this, that enforced slave labor is not confined to the concentration camps per se. There is a growing tendency of forceful relocation of millions of ethnic Uyghurs, Kazakhs to work as slaves in interior coastal areas of China.
Some very, very concerning details there, sir. Now, when it comes to these cotton and tomato products, they're often processed into other popular items like ketchup or clothing items. So can you tell our viewers a little bit more about the various products that can be connected to the forced labor of Uyghurs in China?
Well, you're right. When we say cotton grown in China, we have to know that the 90% of cotton within China comes from Uyghur region exclusively. And the Chinese textile constitutes 30% of the world cotton supply. Apart from cotton and tomato, I would like to mention the following items as solar panels, car components, electric batteries, agriculture, toys, plastic. For example, plastic, polyvinyl, it consists of 10% of global supply, and etc.
Some very concerning details, sir, especially as you highlight even more products that can be available in Canada. Now, when we circle back to this investigation into Walmart, Hugo Boss, and Diesel, what do we know so far about their supply chains and where they source their products?
Well, I'd like to start with the course announcement on launching the probe into this. This is the first time in Canadian history that Canadian ombudsperson is launching such claim. It's the first step in the history of Canada. I would say that we have presented very solid evidence to CORE, and we're glad that our claims were found admissible and credible enough to grant the warrant and launch investigation. I would say the science is on our side. We have a modern day technology like DNA testing, and that technology allows us to trace the origin of cotton within 1 kilometer from within of the cotton field where it's been picked up. So that's here we go with the DNA sampling. And coming back to international brands you have mentioned, since these are international brands, there is no way that they are not well aware of the international affairs and and they are oblivious to the fact that there is an ongoing genocide.
All right, sir, just a quick 45 seconds left here, sir. But many of our viewers might be thinking that they want to help. They want to make a difference in this. So what can our Canadian viewers do to play their part in order to reject the Uyghur genocide in China?
Well, I would say that be vigilant about what you consume. Do not buy into the cheap, look at the price. You have to question where these are originating from and ask yourself whether you are indirectly subsidizing the ongoing genocide. And maybe it comes to the point that it's up to our lawmakers to frame and ban all imports from Uyghur region. Something similar been done in US, in EU, Australia is considering this, UK is doing it.
Well, with just 1 week before the start of school, concerns are rising around a new variant of COVID-19 amid an already crowded list of respiratory infection risks for students. Usually back to school coincides with respiratory infection season, and for students who are at risk of COVID, the flu, colds, and RSV, it's better to be safe than sorry. This comes as BC has detected Canada's first known case of a new COVID-19 variant that has swiftly circled the globe, the BA.286 variant of the Omicron strain. So as kids prepare for the return of classes and the likeliness of coming across some runny noses and dirty hands, how can parents reduce the risk of infection? Well, joining us now in our weekly medical segment is Dr. Abhishek Raut, Medical Director at Apple Tree Medical Group. Dr. Raut, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Great to be here.
So for many kids, it's back to school, and for many parents, it's the most wonderful time of the year. But it won't be that wonderful if your kids get sick, Dr. Raut. So let's talk a little bit about these risks, starting with the BA.286 variant of Omicron. So why has this particular variant made its way to the WHO's list of variants under monitoring?
Right. So this variant, also known as Parola on social media, has gathered a lot of attention because of its potential for increased transmissibility. Variants like this one, we usually closely monitor them. But this one in particular, we're worried because it does contain some mutations on the spike protein of the virus, which definitely impacts the ability to evade the immune response or even enhance its ability to bind to human cells. But research is ongoing. We don't know exactly how potent this variant is going to be with these mutations, and that's why it's got the WHO designation for under monitoring so far.
All right, more to learn about this variant. Now, what about this EG5 variant, which seems to be spreading quite rapidly across the country? What do we know so far about this strain and its severity?
Right, very rapidly indeed. So looking at data from the CDC and Public Health Canada, we would estimate that maybe 20 to 25% of cases of COVID-19 at the end of August, both in Canada and the US, came from EG5, also known as Iris. It doesn't seem to be too different from other strains. EG5 is really a descendant per se of the Omicron variant, which came out in November 2021. It also has a new mutation on its spike protein, and that again, we worry about the ability to evade immunity, and it happens to be the dominant strain at this time.
And what do we know so far about how these COVID variants may interact in children's bodies in particular?
Right. So we are definitely going to see a lot more children being affected just because of back to school in general. And children, like adults, can contact and transmit COVID-19 variants. We do know that for children's bodies, there's a higher transmissibility in general. And severe illness may be a bit less common in children than adults, but not absent. There are certainly cases where children are quite greatly affected. And what we're seeing is whether these variants will make a huge impact for children in particular, and that's something we're watching as well.
All right, Dr. Raut, let's talk about some other conditions that put students at risk, including RSV. So where are we at when it comes to the risk of RSV infection for students in particular this back-to-school season?
Right. So pre-COVID and even during, RSV does cause these yearly outbreaks of respiratory tract disease in Canada, usually late fall to early spring. It's one of the most common cause of lower respiratory tract illnesses in young children. And the children that are most affected or most at risk are actually children less than 2 years of age. And they can get more severe disease like bronchiolitis or pneumonia and may actually need hospitalization.
And what are your thoughts on the classic cold and flu categories this season, Dr. Raut? Is that a big concern for you?
I think the big concern here is we have COVID-19, RSV, influenza, and colds. all transmitting in crowded settings like classrooms, all having similar symptoms, and all having an impact on learning and spreadability to high-risk groups. So definitely there is a concern because we're going to see not only all of these illnesses, but also some people having multiple, and we have to deal with that in an emergent situation.
A huge concern indeed, Dr. Rout. So what kind of steps can parents take to not only protect their kids, but themselves from respiratory infections as kids head back to classes?
Right. So the steps we really need to keep ourselves free from respiratory infections are hand hygiene, respiratory etiquette, so coughing into your elbow or tissue, masking in high-risk places, avoiding sick individuals, and staying hydrated. Now, I explained this to one of my 3-year-old patients, and she sneezed in my face. So what that means is parents are really going to have to make sure that their kids are vaccinated instead and put these things in place. We're also going to have to make sure they're well hydrated and good nutrition in order to keep their immune system strong.
Another great interview, Dr. Rout. Thank you again for your help.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
Up next, our interview with Romain Avril, a culinary influencer, entrepreneur, and Michelin-trained chef, about a Canadian culinary adventure involving top Canadian food creators in Israel. Forum Daily will be right back.
A skilled group of Canadian culinary creators will be traveling to the home of one of the most ancient and holy sites in the world to indulge in its internationally renowned culinary scene. Now, these Canadian food fanatics will be visiting Israel from September 6th to 13th to not only indulge, but learn from their Israeli counterparts. The group includes top chefs, culinary creators, restaurateurs, cookbook authors, photographers, videographers, and foodie influencers. And they plan to not only enjoy the vast selection of culinary delicacies available in the small country, but to also marvel at its historic sites and remarkable archaeology. Well, joining us now to tell us more about this trip and its significance is Michelin-trained chef Romain Avril, a culinary influencer and entrepreneur. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you so much for having me.
So this is quite the impressive group that you will be traveling with, including yourself being a Michelin-trained chef. So why is this skilled group traveling to Israel in particular, and what is the overall purpose of this trip?
Yeah, well, I think there's I would say, two steps to it. First is obviously to discover for most of a land that we haven't been to before. And I know personally, to me, it's like, as a chef, you always want to learn and you are discovering new culture. I think it's very important to kind of like increase your craft, and going to Israel for me, something that was always on the map. So I'm pretty happy it's happening this September.
And we know your team has quite the itinerary for this 7-day trip. What exactly will you be looking forward to in particular?
Well, I'm a big fan of two things, food and history. So to me, it's going to be a mix of both. Discover a new full culture. Even though here in Toronto, I'm lucky enough to be exposed to this culture. I think it's very different when you're in a land. Things that's a bit different. So that's going to be the first thing, and obviously the whole history part of the country is something I'm going to be very much looking forward to.
And as a Michelin-trained chef, what kind of new skills do you think you can learn from this trip?
I don't think there's going to be skills per se. I think it's more the combination of spices, and kind of like seeing different ways of cooking, maybe. I don't think it's going to be kind of like the things that we already know, but maybe things that we haven't thought about yet. So that's what I'm really looking forward as well to kind of discover on this journey.
Now, this is a group of Canadian culinary creators. So what is the significance of this trip for Canada's culinary scene?
Yeah, I mean, Canada is a young country when it comes to cooking and to the food scene. We are exposed to obviously many, many types of cuisine being so multicultural. So I think it's great to kind of like bring that back, and then increase our awareness when it comes to other type of cuisine. And when we talk about it, to be able to have an actual true taste of what it means.
And we know part of the reason for this trip is to discover the similarities that Canada and Israel have in terms of their culinary craft. So what kind of similarities stand out to you?
Well, I think it's the land. We talk often about, being French. We talk a lot about, the French cuisine, Italian cuisine, etc. But I think Canada and Israel have two things in common: is maybe the underutilization of their land. We don't talk about it so much, especially here in Canada, where we tend to bring stuff from everywhere else when we actually have so many resources. And I think that's the similarities that we have in Israel, where they are actually, using the amount of beautiful produce, fish, etc. they get. So I'm hoping that Canada can also realize that we could do the same thing here.
All right, just a little over a minute left here, but you spoke a little bit about culture. Well, we know Israel is also seen by some as having one of the most holy sites in the world in Jerusalem. So what kind of significance does that have for you?
Yeah, I mean, to each their own. I'm sure some of the group may be looking for some of that. Personally, I'm atheist, so the actual religion part may not mean much to me. But I think there's still the historical part through that that I definitely can pay attention to and learn from. So I think regardless, it's going to be very interesting to kind of like see the sacred sites and to learn from them.
And how can our Canadian viewers follow your adventure and the adventure of everybody else on your team?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's going to be a lot of stories posted on through social media and lots of videos. So the best will be to find me on my social platform, and it's my name, so it's easy, Chef Romain Avril.
Perfect, sir. Thank you again for your time today.
Of course, thank you.
I'm Julie Stoutland, and that'll do it for your look at important conversations from this past week. Remember, for more news on demand, you can always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on X and TikTok for updates. You can also watch all our news and commentary programming on the News Forum YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us on Forum Daily Week in Review, and we'll see you next time. Have a great weekend.